What if a single moment of weakness could unmake a kingdom? What if the fate of the North, the fate of thousands of men who had followed their young king south, hinged not upon a battlefield, but upon a fever, a woman's gentle hands, and a boy's aching loneliness in a castle far from home? At the crag, Robb Stark lay burning. The wound was small, a shallow thing taken in the storming of the castle. But the fever that followed was not small at all, and in the long hours of the night it hollowed him out. He was young, he was grieving. His father was dead, his sisters were captive, his brothers were lost to fire and rumor, and every hour he wore the crown it pressed a little heavier upon his brow. And into that hollow place came Jane Westerling, daughter of the very house he had conquered, with cool cloths and quiet words and eyes that held no judgment, only care. She nursed him. She sat beside him in the dark. And in the dark, when a man is weak and wounded and far from everything he loves, the line between gratitude and desire grows perilously thin. He felt himself drawn toward her, the way a cold man is drawn toward fire, not through cunning, not through calculation, but through the simple animal need for warmth. Her hand rested near his. He could have taken it. He wanted to take it. And then he remembered. He remembered a crossing of black water and gray stone. He remembered an old man in a hall, toothless and grasping, and the price that old man had named. Robb Stark had sworn an oath at the twins. In exchange for 4,000 swords and the only bridge that would carry his army home, he had promised to take a bride of House Frey. The words had cost him nothing when he spoke them. They cost him everything now. He does not take her hand. He rises from the bed instead, though his legs are unsteady and the fever still sings in his blood. And he thanks her, and he walks away. It is a small act, a man leaving a room, but in the ledger of history, it is enormous. For a king who honors his vow when no one is watching is a king who has learned the difference between what he wants and what he must do. Robb Stark chose his kingdom over his heart in a candlelit chamber where no chronicler could see him do it, and that choice would echo. That night, in his war tent, he confesses. He goes to his mother, to Catelyn, who has followed her son into war as she followed her heart into ruin, and he tells her the truth of what nearly happened. He does not spare himself. He tells her he came close, closer than a king should ever come, to shaming both House Stark and House Frey in a single reckless breath. The words come out of him like a wound draining. Catelyn listens. She is a woman who has learned to read the small movements of powerful men, and she reads her son now, and what she reads relieves her more than she can easily say, because she knows what he does not fully grasp, not yet. She knows that Walder Frey is not a man to be shamed and forgiven. She knows that the bridge over the Green Fork is the spine of the entire war, that without it, the North is severed from home, that without those 4,000 swords, the arithmetic of every future battle tilts toward defeat. You did well, she tells him, and there is iron beneath the tenderness. You understand that a broken promise to Walder Frey is not a slight. It is a knife, and he would not forgive it, not ever. She presses the point the way a good counselor presses any point that matters more than pride. The Freys hold the crossing. The Freys hold the numbers. Every horse, every wagon, every wounded man who must someday travel north again will travel across Walder Frey's bridge, or will not travel at all. A moment's weakness at the crag would have cost the war its skeleton. Catelyn does not say it so plainly. She does not need to. Robb understands. And here is where the true weight of the vow reveals itself. For it is one thing to walk away from temptation in the dark, and quite another to fortify that decision against the erosion of time and rumor. Robb Stark is his father's son. He does not merely resolve to keep his word. He moves to make the keeping of it a matter of record. He calls for parchment. He calls for wax. In the guttering light of the war tent, with his mother watching, the young king writes to the twins. The letter is formal, careful, unambiguous. He reaffirms his intention to wed one of Lord Walder's daughters or granddaughters the moment the war allows it. He offers no excuses and requests no delay beyond the necessity of the campaign itself. He states his honor plainly, as a man states a thing he means to be held to. He seals it with the direwolf of House Stark, pressing the sigil into the hot wax with the flat of his hand, and the gray wolf runs across the fold of the paper like a promise given shape. Then he summons his fastest rider, not a lord, not a knight who might dawdle at inns or boast of his errand in taverns, but a hard-riding man who knows the roads and keeps his tongue. Robb gives him the letter and gives him a single instruction: ride ahead of every rumor, whatever whispers may have crept out of the crag, whatever a servant might have seen, whatever a maester's raven might carry. This letter must reach Walder Frey first. The old man must learn of Robb's loyalty from Robb's own hand before he can ever suspect a betrayal. The rider mounts in the dark. The letter is warm against his chest, and somewhere to the east, across the wide gray water, an old man in a cold hall waits to see whether the young wolf is a king who keeps his word. What if the strength of a king lay not in the swords he commanded, but in the certainty behind the eyes of the men who wielded them? What if a promise kept in the dark, unseen by any but the man who made it, could shape the outcome of a war fought in daylight? These are the questions that hang over Riverrun in the days that follow, though no lord in the great hall speaks them aloud. The raven comes at dawn, its wings heavy with rain, and the word it carries changes everything. Tywin Lannister has marched. The old lion has left the safety of Harrenhal and turned his host westward, moving to relieve the Lannister forces before the tide of the war can drown them. Robb reads the message twice. He does not let his face change. A king who flinches at the mention of Tywin Lannister teaches his bannermen to flinch, and Robb has learned already that fear travels through an army faster than any raven flies. He calls his lords to council. They come to the solar with mud still on their boots and the weather still on their cloaks, and they arrange themselves around the long table the way pieces arrange themselves on a board, each man conscious of his position relative to all the others. The Great John takes his place near the head, all bluster and appetite, a man who solves problems by charging at them. Roose Bolton takes a seat farther back, in the quieter part of the room, where the candlelight does not quite reach his pale, unblinking eyes. He prefers the shadows. Shadows reveal a great deal to a man who knows how to watch. The Great John speaks first, because the Great John always speaks first. "Strike," he says. "Meet the old lion in the field and break him." His fist comes down on the table, and the wine cups jump, and the men around him nod, because a bold voice is easy to follow. Robb listens. He does not interrupt. There is value in letting a loud man empty himself before the quiet men are asked to speak, for the loud man's certainty will draw out the doubts of everyone else. Then Roose Bolton offers his counsel, and his voice is soft, and the room leans toward him to hear it. "Patience," he says. "Tywin is old and cunning, and his ground is chosen. A battle on Tywin's terms is a battle already half lost. But there is something beneath the words, something the king notices and files away without expression, because Roose Bolton is not only offering counsel, he is measuring. Each question he poses is a probe, delicate as a knife slipped between ribs, testing where the young wolf is soft, where he can be pressed, how he answers when a lord older than his father speaks to him as though he were still a boy. Robb feels the probing and lets nothing show. He gives the man exactly the confidence he wishes seen, and no more. A king reveals his strength. He conceals his uncertainty, and he never allows a lord to learn which of the two he is looking at. It is then that Edmure Tully speaks, warm and eager, and dangerously certain, and reports his intention to hold the fords of the Red Fork against the coming host. He means well. He means to defend his people, to keep the Lannister soldiers from the fields and villages of his own lands. And there is honor in it, and there is folly in it, and the two are wound together so tightly that Edmure himself cannot tell them apart. Robb sees at once what his uncle does not. To hold the fords is to bar the door that he needs left open. If Tywin cannot pass, Tywin cannot be drawn west. And the west, the golden undefended heart of Lannister power, is the true prize. So Robb makes his command absolute this time. He does not suggest. He does not hope his uncle will understand. He has learned that a king who leaves his orders soft leaves them to be reinterpreted by every man too proud to obey them plainly. Withdraw from the fords, he says, and let Tywin pass. Let the old lion chase a shadow eastward, while the young wolf slips behind him into Lannister lands undefended. The words are quiet and they are final, and Edmure's face colors, and for a moment the honor and the folly war within him. But the king does not soften it. He holds his uncle's eyes until Edmure lowers his own. The command is understood. Whether it is obeyed remains a thing the Red Fork will answer in its own time. The council breaks. The lords disperse to their duties, and Robb is left alone with the guttering candles and the map spread across the table like a country pinned beneath his hands. He thinks then of the letter riding east, warm against a hard man's chest, carrying his loyalty to the old lord in the cold hall. He thinks of the marriage he has not made and the woman he did not take, and he waits for the ache of it to find him. It does not come the way he expected. Something else has grown in its place. If you're enjoying this alternate history of Westeros so far, please consider subscribing. I upload new stories every single day. Now, let's continue with the story. Every lord who left this room believes in him. Not one of them looked at their king and wondered whether his word was a thing that could be trusted, because his word has not yet been broken. The Great John follows him for glory. Rose Bolton watches him for weakness and has found none. Edmure obeys him, however grudgingly, because obedience is owed to a king who keeps his vows. This is what the promise bought. Not love, something colder and more useful than love. Belief. And a war is won by belief before it is ever won by swords. He straightens over the map and traces the road west with one finger, following it past the fords, past the shadow of the old lion, into the soft golden country where no army waits. Win the war first, he tells himself. Take a bride when the winning is done. His finger stops. Somewhere to the east, the old man is still waiting. What if the hardest battle a king fights is the one that asks for nothing of his sword? There is a room in the crag, high in the westernmost tower, where the sea wind slips through the arrow slits and stirs the old tapestries against the stone. Jane Westerling waits there. She has arranged the meeting through a servant and a whisper, careful, quiet, the way a girl learns to move through a house that belongs to a family that has chosen the wrong side of a war. She does not know yet which side that is. She knows only that the young king is leaving, and that she wishes to see him once more before he is gone, and that wishing this at all is a kind of danger she has not fully counted. Robb comes because it would be cruelty to refuse her. That is the first calculation, and it is not a cold one. He has learned already that mercy costs less than men imagine and buys more than they expect. He climbs the tower stair with his sword left below, because a man does not come armed to a farewell, and he finds her standing at the narrow window with the gray water behind her. She turns. She has rehearsed something. He can see it in the set of her mouth, in the way her hands are folded too carefully at her waist. Whatever she means to say, she does not say it. Instead, she asks him, simply, whether he will come back. He does not lie to her. That is the whole of it, the thing that makes the moment bearable and unbearable both. A lesser man would soothe her with a promise he could break at leisure once the war carried him elsewhere. Robb has learned what promises are for. He tells her that his word is already given. He tells her that it was given to House Frey before ever he rode west, given in the presence of his mother and his bannermen, given as the price of the bridge that will carry his army home. He tells her that a king who breaks faith to please his own heart deserves no crown at all, and that the men who follow him follow because his word has not yet bent. She listens. She does not weep, not there, not while he can see her, and he respects her the more for it. When he finishes, she says only that she understands, and the word is heavy with everything it does not contain. He takes her hand. He kisses it once, the way a man honors a lady he will never see again, and then he goes down the stair and does not look back, because looking back would undo the thing he has just built. That is one departure. There is another, quieter, more consequential, playing out 2 floors below in the Lord's Solar. Gawain Westerling is a man caught between 2 lions and a wolf. He is sworn to Casterly Rock by blood and old debt, and the Starks hold his castle by right of the sword, and between those 2 truths, there is very little room for a man to stand without falling. He has spent the days of Robb's stay waiting to be forced, waiting to be made to declare, to rise, to betray one master or the other, and lose everything either way. The force never comes. Robb sits across from him and speaks not as a conqueror, but as a bookkeeper of loyalties. He does not ask Lord Gawain to break his oath to Tywin Lannister. He asks something smaller and cleverer. He asks him to do nothing, to hold the crag neither for the lion nor the wolf, but for itself, to shut his gates to Lannister levies and open them to no one, to sit out the storm and let the tide of the war decide who he serves when it is done. A man who is asked only to survive will nearly always agree. Gawain agrees. And so Robb secures his flank without spilling a drop of blood, without earning an enemy who would remember the earning. The crag becomes a still point on the board, a piece that neither side can use, which is worth more to him than a piece he would have had to garrison and guard. He leaves it behind him unbroken. He rides east with the western coast quiet at his back, and no vengeful house whispering to Casterly Rock that the young wolf came and took what was not his. The northern host uncoils from the crag like a gray ribbon drawn eastward. 20,000 men and their horses and their wains, the long dust of them rising against the golden autumn hills, and at the head of it a king who is thinking not of the country he leaves, but of the old man he must still win. Before the vanguard has cleared the coastal road, he calls for a rider. The second envoy to the twins is chosen with care, not a great lord, whose rank might read as pressure, and not a mere messenger, whose lowness might read as insult. A knight of middling name and courtly manner, sent with gifts, wine from the reach taken in the fighting, a brooch of northern silver worked in the shape of the twin towers of House Frey, a flattery so deliberate it borders on art, and, folded within a letter written in Robb's own hand, a proposed timeline for the wedding, dates and seasons laid out like the terms of a treaty, the offer of a thing certain in place of a thing merely promised. At the twins, Walder Frey turns the brooch over in his spotted fingers and reads the letter twice. The resentment is still in him, coiled and old and patient, the resentment of a man who has been made to wait his whole life for the respect of his betters. But something in the attention pleases him despite himself. A king has thought of him. A king has sent silver shaped like his own towers. The old man does not soften all at once. He softens the way stone softens under water, slowly, invisibly, and he sets the letter down and calls for his steward and begins, for the first time, to count the wedding as a thing that will truly come. What if the war that Robb Stark fought was never truly his war to win in the south, and every mile his banners marched away from the north was a mile of ground he could not defend behind him? The raven comes at the gray hour before dawn, when the fires in the camp have burned to coals and the sentries stand blowing into their hands against the damp. It comes from the south, from the mouth of the Trident, where men still trade whispers up and down the river, faster than any lord can ride, and the maester, who takes it from the bird's leg, reads it standing in the cold, and then reads it again, because the first reading did not feel like something a man could carry to a king. Stannis Baratheon is broken. The fleet burned upon the Blackwater in a green fire that turned the river to a torch. His host shattered against the walls of King's Landing, not by Lannister steel alone, but by the arrival of the Reach. The endless golden columns of House Tyrell come down from Highgarden to bind their fortunes to the Lannister cause. Two great powers joined, the wealth of the West and the wealth of the South, married in a single afternoon of slaughter. Robb reads it in his tent with the flap tied back and the wet dawn light falling across the parchment. He does not speak at first. He is doing arithmetic behind his eyes, the arithmetic every king must do, and few do honestly, and the numbers are not kind. The Reach feeds the realm. The Reach fields spears beyond counting. Where before there was a boy king propped up by a spent and cornered lion, now there is a throne braced by the richest kingdom in Westeros, and every calculation Robb had made in the first flush of his victories must be made again, from the beginning, in colder blood. Catelyn is there when he lowers the letter. She has aged in this campaign, worn thin by grief and worry, but her mind has not dulled, and she sees in her son's face the thing he has not yet said aloud. The South is closing, she tells him. Quiet, not a question. Whatever door was open to us there is shutting. It is shut, Robb answers. It's shut on the Blackwater. She lets the silence hold a moment. Then she says the thing she has been waiting to say since Winterfell fell to the Ironborn, since the raven that named Theon Greyjoy a traitor and turned Robb's own hearth into an enemy's prize. She speaks of peace, not surrender, never that, but of alliances mended and enemies weighed, of the North secured before the North is lost entirely, of the plain and unbearable truth that a king cannot rule a kingdom he no longer holds. Winterfell taken, the Karstarks restless, Roose Bolton's loyalty, a thing measured always in what it might cost to keep it, and now the South grown too strong to break with the men remaining to them. Robb hears her out. He does not interrupt, because he has learned that his mother's counsel is the counsel of a woman who has already thought 3 moves past where his own thinking stops. And when she finishes, he goes to the map upon the table, the map worn soft at the folds, and he sets his palm flat over the North and holds it there. I marched south for justice, he says, for my father. and they made me a king for it, these lords, before any of us stopped to ask what a king in the north is for. He traces the line of the neck, the narrow throat of land where the riverlands become the north, the door that a determined man might hold against an army 10 times his own. Not the Iron Throne. I was never going to sit the Iron Throne. That was Stannis's dream, and Renly's, and look what dreams have earned them. A pause. I do not need the South. I need the South to leave me be. The strategy assembles itself in the space of that quiet, and Catelyn watches it come together in her son, the way a mother watches a child grow taller in a single season, all at once and yet inevitably. An independent north, a crown that does not reach for the whole realm, but holds fast to its own. The north and the riverlands bound together into a single body, with the neck for its guarded throat, and the twins for its keystone. And in that instant, every piece Robb has been moving without quite knowing why, arranges itself into a single design. The Frey wedding is no longer a debt of honor merely, no longer only a broken vow made whole. It is the hinge on which the whole ambition turns. The crossing at the twins is the crossing. It is the only easy road between the riverlands and the north, and the man who holds it holds the passage of armies, the passage of grain, the passage of a kingdom's very blood. To seal that man's loyalty with a marriage is to seal the border itself. The wedding first, Robb says. The Freys' loyalty made certain, the crossing made ours in truth and not merely in name. Then we gather the whole strength of the river lords and the Frey spears together, and we march north, and we take back Winterfell, and we throw the Ironborn into the sea that spat them out. He looks up at his mother. Let Lannister keep his throne. Let Tyrell keep his gold. They can quarrel over the south until the end of days. I will have a kingdom they cannot afford to bleed for. Catelyn nods slowly, and there is something in her that is close to relief and close to dread and cannot decide between them, because it is a sound plan. It is the soundest plan he has yet made, and soundness, she has learned, is no protection at all against the men who smile and pour the wine and count the days until a king comes to their door. Outside, the maester is already drafting the letter to the twins. What if a single letter could unmake a man more completely than any sword upon the field? What if the news that arrives not through a herald's trumpet, but through a rider's exhausted silence, should prove more dangerous to a king's cause than all the armies of the Westerlands combined? The letter comes on a gray morning, when the mist has not yet lifted from the river, and the camp still smells of wet ash and horses. Robb is at his maps when the maester enters, and he knows before a word is spoken. He knows by the way the old man will not meet his eyes. He knows by the way the parchment trembles in a hand that has held steady through 100 grim dispatches. The maester does not read it aloud. He simply sets it upon the table, and Robb reads it himself, once, and then again, and then a third time, as though repetition might reveal some hidden clause, some qualification, some mercy folded into the ink that he has somehow overlooked. There is none. Winterfell has fallen. Theon Greyjoy, the boy his father raised as a son, the ward who broke bread at his table and rode at his side, has taken the castle by treachery, and Bran and Rickon, the little brothers Robb sent away to safety, the boys who were meant to grow old in the halls their family has held for 8,000 years, are dead, murdered, their heads mounted upon the walls of their own home. Robb does not shout. This is the thing the men outside the tent will remember. Later, when they speak of it in whispers, he does not shout. He goes very still, the stillness of a man who has been struck so hard that the body has not yet understood it must fall. And then, slowly, his hand closes upon the edge of the table, the knuckles whitening, and a sound comes out of him that is not a word, that is not a cry, that is something older than both, the sound a wolf might make finding the den emptied and cold. He vows it then, softly, which is worse than loudly. He vows that he will hang Theon Greyjoy from the walls of Winterfell, from the very stones the Ironborn defiled, and that he will do it slowly, and that the crows will have him as they had his brothers. The words are terrible precisely because they are so quiet. A king who screams his vengeance may forget it by morning. A king who whispers it has already begun to carry it out in the silence of his heart. Catelyn comes to him in the gray aftermath. She has lost 2 sons in a single letter, and her grief is a thing so vast that it has passed through the far side of weeping into a dreadful clarity. And here is the calculation she makes, the mother's arithmetic that no council of lords would dare to voice. She has lost Bran. She has lost Rickon. She has lost her husband before them. And she has 2 daughters still living, Sansa and Arya, held in the Lannisters' hands in the capital. 2 pieces still upon the board. 2 lives that might yet be saved if only a bargain could be struck. So she begs him. "Make peace," she says. "Bend, only enough, only for now. Give them their throne and take back your sisters." Robb looks at her, and the love in his face is real, and the refusal is real, and both are absolute. Because here is what he understands that grief has hidden from her. To bend the knee now, with Bran and Rickon warm in their graves and Theon squatting in the ancient seat of their house, would be to tell every northern lord who has bled for him that their dead have died for nothing. It would unmake the crown they set upon his head in a hall loud with defiance. And the Lannisters, he knows, do not honor bargains struck from weakness. They honor only strength and the fear of strength. And a king who kneels is a king they need no longer fear. So he refuses, gently, which costs him more than harshness would. He will march north, he tells her. He will cross at the twins, satisfy the Freys, take the girl to wife as he has promised, gather their spears to his own, and drive the Ironborn from his home. His sisters he will win back not by begging, but by making himself so formidable that the Lannisters must treat with him as an equal. It is a plan built of logic, stone upon stone, and it does not fall. But the ground beneath it is shifting, and Robb feels the tremor of it even now. The Karstarks are the first crack. Lord Rickard has lost sons of his own to the Kingslayer's blade, and his grief has curdled into something that no longer answers cleanly to a king's command. Robb walks his camp in the days that follow, and he reads it the way he reads a battle map. This fraying of discipline, this restlessness that moves through the host like a fever. Men who marched south for glory have grown weary of waiting. Men who marched for vengeance find their vengeance denied them, penned behind the walls of a captured city that Robb dares not assault. The northern lords whisper of home, of fields untended and daughters unwed, of a winter coming that will find them 1,000 leagues from their own hearths. And Robb understands, with the cold precision of a commander who has learned to see his own weakness before his enemy does, that a coalition is not a thing forged once and forever. It is a fire that must be fed. Idleness is the frost that kills it. Only motion can hold these men together now. Only a swift campaign with a clear end, and the promise of Frey spears swelling their thinned ranks. Only the sense that they march towards something rather than rot in place. So the crossing at the Twins is no longer merely a strategy. It has become a necessity, the single hinge upon which everything else must turn. And somewhere to the north, in a keep of 2 towers straddling the green water, an old man waits, and counts, and smiles. What if a mother's love, unbroken and unbargained, became the very blade that severed a king from his cause? What if the woman who gave Robb Stark his life gave him also, in the space of a single night, his deepest wound? The tale turns now upon a chamber, deep within the walls of River Run, where a captive lion has been kept in irons, and where Catelyn Stark stands before him with a candle burning low. She has heard the news from King's Landing. Her daughters are held there, one of them betrothed to the boy king, who ordered her husband's head struck from his shoulders. The other vanished entirely, a ghost in the great sprawling city where a girl might disappear and never be found. And Catelyn, who has watched one child buried in ice and two more slip beyond her reach, does the arithmetic that only a grieving mother can do. She weighs a kingdom against a daughter. She finds the kingdom wanting, so she moves. Quietly, in the dead hours, she summons the tall woman sworn to her service, the one they call Brienne, and she strikes her own bargain in the dark. Free the Kingslayer, escort him south, trade a lion for 2 she-wolves, and pray the Lannisters honor the exchange. It is a mother's logic, and it is treason. She knows this. She weighs that too, and she chooses. The irons come off, the gate opens, and by the time the sun climbs over the eastern hills, Jaime Lannister is gone, riding south with a warrior maid at his side, and Robb Stark's single most valuable prisoner has become smoke on the morning air. Consider the position of a young king who wakes to discover that his own mother has emptied his hand of its highest card. The shock of it, the betrayal, though he cannot name it so, because the one who betrayed him is the one who bore him. Robb stands in the yard, where the empty cell gapes open, and he does not shout. That is what the accounts remember. He does not rage. He goes very still, the way ice goes still before it cracks, and he understands in that stillness that he must now do a thing no son should ever be asked to do. He confines her, his own mother, placed under guard, watched day and night by men who cannot meet her eyes. It is the smallest punishment he can offer that still resembles justice, and it satisfies no one, least of all himself. For a king cannot be seen to hold his own house above the law, and yet a son cannot lift a hand against the woman who raised him, and Robb Stark is trapped in the narrow country between those two truths, where every path leads to loss. And into that narrow country rides Lord Rickard Karstark, and he rides carrying his dead. 2 sons slain by the Kingslayer's hand in the fighting before the man was ever taken. 2 sons whose vengeance now gallops free down the southern road because the king's own mother willed it so. Karstark comes before Robb with grief hardened into iron, and he asks, no, he demands, the only price he believes will balance the ledger, Catelyn's life, her head, for the freedom she granted the man who murdered his blood. He speaks it plainly, in the hall, before the assembled lords, and the words hang in the air like a challenge no one dares to answer. Robb refuses. Of course he refuses. He will not kill his mother, not for Karstark, not for justice, not for the fragile unity of a coalition already cracking at the seams. But observe the cost of that refusal. Observe how it lands upon the northern lords who have followed this boy across 1,000 leagues on the strength of a single promise, that a Stark keeps his word, that a Stark honors the law, that a Stark does not bend the rules of men to shelter his own. And now they watch him bend. They watch him spare the guilty, because the guilty shares his blood, and something in them cools. Something in them begins, very quietly, to calculate. This is the true damage of that night, not the loss of the Kingslayer, though that loss is grievous. It is the loss of certainty. It is the moment the northern lords first glimpse that their king is a man like other men, capable of favoring his own. capable of grief that overmasters judgment. Trust, once whole, has been chipped. And a coalition, as Robb himself has come to understand, is a fire that must be fed. He has just watched a bucket of frost thrown across the coals. So he does what a commander does when his position weakens. He looks at the board anew, and he counts what remains to him. The bargaining chip is gone. There will be no trading Jaime for Sansa now. No leverage against the Lannisters bought with a captive lion. That door has closed, which means the war can no longer be won at the negotiating table. It must be won on the field, decisively, swiftly, before the frost creeps further into the coals and the whole fire gutters out. And there is only one path to a swift and decisive victory: the Freys, the crossing, the spears he needs to swell his thinning ranks, and the alliance he needs to bind the wavering North back to his banner. Everything that was true before the Kingslayer's escape is now twice as true. The twins are no longer one option among several. They are the only option that remains. Robb calls for parchment and quill. He sends word north, ahead of his host, to the old man who waits in the keep of 2 towers and counts, and smiles. He writes that he will come. He writes that he will honor the wedding, the debt, the promise made in the flush of desperation on the banks of a swollen river. He seals it with the direwolf, and he does not hesitate over the wax. Somewhere to the south, a lion rides toward home. Somewhere behind him, a mother sits under guard. And somewhere to the north, the parchment travels, carrying a king's word toward the twins. What if grief could be a weapon turned inward, against one's own cause? What if a single man, undone by loss, could unravel in a night what a king had spent a year weaving together? In the camp at River Run, where the letter sealed with the direwolf has only just begun its northward journey, another kind of message is being written, not in ink, in blood. Rickard Karstark has lost 2 sons. He watched the Kingslayer cut them down at the Whispering Wood, and he has carried the memory of it since like a stone swallowed whole, sitting cold and heavy in his gut. He came to war for revenge, as much as for the North, and now the instrument of that revenge has slipped free. Jaime Lannister rides south, unpunished, unbled, laughing perhaps at the ease of it. And the man who let him go, by carelessness, by the treachery of a woman under his own roof, is the king, Karstark's king, his kin, the boy whose banners he has followed through mud and frost, and the deaths of his own blood. Consider the arithmetic of a broken man. If the great enemy cannot be reached, then a lesser one will serve. If the lion has fled the trap, then the cubs remain. Willem and Martin Lannister are children, barely more than boys, cousins to the Kingslayer, hostages held for their value at some future bargaining table. They have done nothing. They are pieces on the board with no power to move themselves, waiting to be traded. And in the dark of the cells beneath River Run, Rickard Karstark decides that they will pay the debt their kinsman owes. He does not do it alone. He bribes the guards, or overpowers them, or leans upon the old loyalty men of the North owe a lord of his standing. The details matter less than the outcome. When the doors are opened, the boys wake to the sound of it, and there is a moment, brief, terrible, when they understand. Willem cries out. Martin perhaps says nothing at all, and Karstark's men fall upon them with their blades, and the thing is done, and it cannot be undone, and blood pools on the stone floor of the cells, where a king's honor was meant to be kept safe. Word reaches Robb before dawn. He comes down to the cells himself, and he looks at what has been made there, and something in him goes very still. Around him, his lords are already speaking, already calculating, because they too can read a board. Karstark commands 300 horse, and near 2,000 foot. In a host bled thin, weakened by the flight of his mother's hostage and the fracturing of his cause. Those swords are not a small thing. They are survival. Edmure counsels caution. The great John, no friend to leniency, still measures the cost of it. Spare him, some of them say. Chain him. Keep his men. Judge him when the war is won and the North is whole again. Expedience whispers its old, reasonable song. And here is the fulcrum on which everything turns. What if a king, faced with treason and murder within his own camp, chose the swords over the law? What if he swallowed the crime because he could not afford to punish it? He would keep his 2,000 men. He would keep them for a season, perhaps. But he would lose something he cannot buy back with any number of spears. He would become a king who bends his justice to necessity, who lets great lords murder children in his cells because they are too valuable to hang. And every man in that host would know it, and would remember it, and would understand precisely how much a life is worth beneath the direwolf banner. Robb understands this. He has spent the whole of this campaign learning what his father knew in his bones and could never quite teach with words. The man who passes the sentence must swing the sword. Honor is not the ornament of power. It is the foundation of it. Take away the king's justice, and you take away the king. He gives Rickard Karstark a chance to pray. He tells him he will not dishonor him by hanging, that he will die by the sword as a lord should. And Karstark, unrepentant, spits his defiance to the last. He tells Robb that killing him will curse him. He tells him he is no king, only a boy who lets murderers, meaning the woman, meaning Catelyn, go free, while he strikes down men whose only crime was grief. And Robb does not answer the accusation. He raises the greatsword Ice, the pale Valyrian steel that his father carried, and his grandfather before him. And in the gray light of the yard he brings it down, and Rickard Karstark's head parts from his shoulders, and the debt is paid in the only coin that could balance it. The cost comes that same night. Half the Karstark men do not wait for morning. They gather their horses and their gear in silence, and they ride out of the camp under cover of dark, back toward the north, toward their own cold lands, carrying their fury and their fallen lord's grievance with them. 300 horse become fewer than half that number. The foot melt away in the confusion. By the time the sun rises over River Run, Robb Stark commands a host measurably smaller than the one he led the day before, and he stands in the yard where the blood has been washed from the stones and does the arithmetic that no king wishes to do. He is weaker now, weaker than yesterday, weaker than the day the Kingslayer fled. His enemies to the south grow while he shrinks, and the 4,000 Frey swords that were a matter of honor when he sent that letter north have become, in the space of a single night, the difference between a campaign that endures and one that collapses beneath its own losses. The twins are no longer merely the price of a broken oath restored. They are the last, cold foundation on which everything he still hopes to hold now rests. And somewhere to the north, the parchment travels on. What does a king do when arithmetic turns against him in a single night? He counts what remains, and then he counts what he might yet acquire, and he sends the man best suited to the acquiring. Robb Stark chose Sir Brynden Tully to ride to the twins because the Blackfish was the one man in his host whom Walder Frey could neither intimidate nor easily deceive, a warrior of such settled reputation that the old lord would understand at once that the king in the north took this matter with the gravest seriousness. A boy might have been sent, a green squire, a minor lord, a courtesy delegation to smooth the way. Robb sent his great-uncle instead, and the choice was itself a message. And Walder Frey, who read such messages the way other men read weather, understood it before the party had cleared the last bend of the river road. They rode with 24 men, banners furled against the rain, and the towers of the twins rose before them out of the gray, like the teeth of something ancient and patient that had waited a very long time to be fed. The Frey stronghold sat astride the only crossing for 100 leagues, and Walder Frey had grown old and rich and monstrously fertile in the shadow of that simple geographic fact. He held the road. He had always held the road. And a man who holds the road need not be loved, need only be needed. And Walder Frey had spent 70 years cultivating the certainty that sooner or later everyone would need him. He received the Blackfish in his great hall, propped in his high seat like a spider at the center of a web woven from grandchildren, and he did not rise, and he did not smile, and he let the silence stretch until it began to have weight. This too was a move. Every discourtesy was a move. He was reminding the delegation, without a single word, of the insult he believed he had swallowed when the king first bent toward the Westerling girl, and he was reminding them, in the same breath, that the swallowing had cost him nothing, because the king had come crawling back to the arrangement all the same. Pride demanded acknowledgement. Pride, denied, curdles into grievance, and grievance in a man who holds the road becomes a weapon. Sir Brynden Tully understood the game as well as any man alive. He did not flatter, he did not grovel. He laid the king's terms upon the table plainly, and he let the old lord see that the crawling, such as it was, would be handsomely paid for. Robb Stark had not sent his great uncle to beg. He had sent him to purchase, and the coin was generous, and the generosity was itself the strategy. Feed the pride, feed it richly. A well-fed pride is a loyal one, or loyal enough for long enough, which in war is all that loyalty ever means. Walder Frey named the bride himself, savoring the naming. Roslyn, one of his granddaughters, a girl by his 6th wife, quiet and comely by the old man's own grudging account, though no one present mistook her comeliness for the point of the transaction. The point was the settlement that came attached to her. Dowry first, and here the numbers were spoken aloud and written down and spoken again. Gold and grain, and the promise of lands, should the war go well. Precedence next. And this mattered more to Walder Frey than gold ever could. The guarantee that his house would sit high in the new order the king in the north meant to build. That the sons of Roslyn's future would be favored. That no Frey would again be made to feel the sting of being overlooked. And future favor beyond all of it, vague and vast and impossible to fully quantify. The assurance that the king would remember, always, who opened the road when the road was the only thing between him and ruin. Sir Brynden granted it. He granted nearly all of it, because Robb had instructed him to grant nearly all of it, because Robb had done the arithmetic in the bloody yard at River Run and knew precisely what 4,000 swords were worth to a host that had shrunk in the night. A king measures the price of a thing against the price of not having it. The dowry was steep. The precedence was galling. The future favor was a debt with no fixed sum. But the alternative was a campaign that bled to death one desertion at a time. And against that alternative, every concession became cheap, absurdly cheap, cheaper than breathing. So the bargain was renewed. The old man's mottled hands, when they finally moved to seal it, and something in the set of his shoulders eased, the particular ease of a man who has been proven right, who has waited and been vindicated in his waiting, who knew all along that the world would remember it needed him. He offered wine. The wine, offered late and grudgingly, was itself the final move. The acknowledgement that the delegation was no longer merely tolerated but welcomed, that the road was open, that the pact would hold. Word rode back to Riverrun, faster than the delegation itself, and the word changed the camp. Men who had watched a portion of their strength melt into the northern dark now understood that something had been recovered, that the king had turned a broken thing into a whole one, that the way home ran through the twins, and the twins would let them pass. Morale is arithmetic too, of a subtler kind, and the arithmetic shifted. There would be a wedding, there would be an alliance, there would be a march north through the crossing, and the crossing would open, and the road home, the road that had seemed for one gray dawn to be closing forever, lay before them again. Robb Stark stood on the battlements of Riverrun and watched the couriers come in, and he permitted himself, for the first time in many days, something close to hope. The pieces were moving back into their places. The board was steadying beneath his hand, and far to the south, unhurried and unaware, his enemies made their own calculations and did not yet know what he had just secured. What does a king do with the one prisoner he cannot afford to keep and cannot afford to lose? Catelyn Stark had been kept under a soft confinement since the day she freed the Kingslayer, watched by guards who called her lady and looked at their boots when she passed. It was not a dungeon. It was worse in its way, a courtesy that never once forgot itself. And now, with the host preparing to march and a wedding waiting at the end of the road, Robb Stark walked to her chambers himself, because some doors a king must open with his own hand or not at all. The reconciliation was not warm. It could not be. Too much lay between them, a bridge of grief and error that neither could cross entirely. She had betrayed his war for love of her son. He had understood the love and could not forgive the betrayal. And both of these things were true at once, and both sat in the room with them like a third and silent presence. He told her she would ride to the twins. He told her she would stand beside him when he honored the pact she had once brokered in his name. And she looked at him a long moment before she spoke, weighing what a mother owes a son against what a bannerwoman owes a king. "You mean to make good on Walder Frey," she said. It was not a question. "I mean to marry a daughter of the crossing," he answered, "as I swore." She nodded slowly, and then she gave him the warning that only she could give, because only she had sat across the table from these men and read the arithmetic behind their eyes. "Trust the Freys," she told him, "precisely as far as their own interest carries them, and not 1 inch beyond. A Frey keeps a bargain while the bargain profits him. Make certain it always profits him. And Roose Bolton," here her voice dropped, "careful, deliberate. Watch Roose Bolton most of all, for he is the quietest man in your camp, and the quiet ones are the ones who do their sums in the dark." Robb heard her. He did not entirely believe her, not yet, for Bolton had given him no cause. But he heard her, and the words settled somewhere behind his ribs and stayed. Then came Edmure, and Edmure came ashamed. The Blackfish's nephew, the Lord of Riverrun, still carried the weight of the Red Fork upon him, that eager blunder where he had won a battle his king had needed him to lose, where he had turned back Tywin Lannister, and in doing so, let the great lion slip the trap and march to save King's Landing. Edmure knew what his zeal had cost. He carried it in his shoulders, and so he came to Robb with an offer meant to buy back some fraction of what he felt he owed, meant to lay a coin of his own upon the scale of honor. "Let me marry a Frey," Edmure said. "I am unwed. I am Lord of Riverrun. Old Walder would count that no small prize. Let me stand at the altar and mend what my haste has torn." It was a generous offer. It was also the wrong offer, and Robb saw why in the space of a breath. "No," he said. He explained it the way a man explains a move he has already made in his head. The debt owed to House Frey was not a debt of any Tully. It was a debt of the crown. He, Robb, had broken the oath. He, Robb, had knelt to a Westerling girl and shattered a sworn thing. And a broken king's oath could be mended by nothing less than a king's own hand, sworn again, in flesh and blood, before the eyes of gods and men, and the whole grinning brood of the twins. To send Edmure in his place would be to say the crown's word could be settled with lesser coin. Old Walder would smell it. Old Walder always smelled it. Only the king's marriage could repay what only the king had spent. Edmure bowed his head and did not argue, and there was relief in him that he was too honorable to name. So the host marched, and as it marched, one man rode at its rear and did his sums in the dark. Exactly as Catelyn had said. Roose Bolton was a man who never wagered on a single outcome. He kept his coins in many purses. He watched the wind before he raised a sail, and for weeks now, riding in Robb Stark's shadow, he had held a second calculation folded away behind his pale and patient eyes. A calculation that began with a question, and the question was simply this: what does the North gain if the wolf falls? He had turned it over many nights. A weakened king, a war going sour, an alliance cracked at its foundation. Those were the conditions under which a careful man might consider a very dangerous thing. Those were the conditions under which a whisper carried south to Casterly Rock might be worth the terrible risk of sending it. But the conditions had changed. Bolton watched the road ahead and read what his eyes told him. The king had not broken his oath and left it broken. The king had gone to the Freys and knelt again, and the Freys had opened their gate, and the crossing that might have been a trap was now a hinge swinging the right way. The host was reinforced. Morale had turned. The road home lay open, and the alliance was closing like a wound healing clean. And a betrayal, to a man who counted everything, is only wise when the thing betrayed is already falling. This thing was not falling. This thing was standing straighter every mile. So Roose Bolton did the arithmetic once more, cleanly, coldly, all the way to the end, and at the end of it he set the folded calculation aside, unspoken, unsent, and let it go into the dark from which it came. Not from loyalty, from reckoning. The wolf was too strong to bet against, and Roose Bolton did not bet against strength. Ahead, through the gray and the river mist, the twin towers rose. The sept at the twins was small, older than the towers that flanked it, and the light that came through its narrow windows fell in pale bars across the stone. Rosalind Frey stood beneath the seven-pointed crystal with her hands folded before her, and she was slighter than the king had expected. Dark of hair, delicate of feature, her eyes lowered in the way of a girl who had been told all her life that her wishes would count for little. She had been told wrong today, though she did not yet know it. Today her wishes counted for a great deal, because Robb Stark had come to keep a promise, and the keeping of it had turned a frightened girl into the mortar that would hold two great houses together. Consider the arithmetic of the moment. A cloak of gray wool, edged in white, the direwolf of Winterfell worked upon it in silver thread. Robb settled it across her narrow shoulders, and in doing so he took her under his protection, and in taking her under his protection, he closed a circuit that had lain open and sparking for the whole of the war. The words were spoken. They were simple words, older than the Freys and older than the Starks, and they bound two people before gods and men. She was his, and he was hers. The Septon named them one flesh, one heart, one soul, and if the king did not feel those things in his breast, he understood them in his mind, and understanding, for now, would serve. Walder Frey watched from his high seat with the eyes of a man who had waited a long time to be honored and had begun to believe the honor would never come. Now it had come. A king had knelt in his hall. A king had wed his daughter beneath his roof, in his sept, before his 100 descendants. And whatever grievance the old man had nursed in the dark of his suspicious heart, whatever slights he had counted and recounted through the long years, they found no purchase now, because the debt had been paid in the only coin a proud and slighted man will accept, which is public respect rendered publicly. The feast that followed was lavish beyond what the twins had known in a generation. Bread was broken, and salt was given, freely, from the Lord's own hand into the hands of his guests, and the guests took it, and in the taking guest right was invoked, and in the invoking a thing older than any alliance descended upon that hall like a stillness upon water. No man beneath that roof would raise a hand against another. It was law. It was more than law. It was the oldest promise the first men ever made, and both sides honored it, because neither side had cause to break it, and cause is the mother of every betrayal that ever was. Think on that. In another telling of this night, in some darker branch of the tree of what might be, cause existed, and cause bloomed into slaughter, and the bread and salt were made a lie. But here there was no lie. Here the wine flowed, and the fiddlers played, and Robb Stark rose from his place and danced, first with his bride, awkwardly, both of them stiff with the strangeness of it, and then more easily, because youth finds its feet quickly, and because the music was good, and the fires were warm, and the war was, for one night, very far away. He spoke long with his new goodfather. He filled the old man's cup with his own hand and set it before him, and Walder Frey, who trusted no one and never had, found himself half warmed against his own better judgment. They spoke of the crossing. They spoke of the campaign to come, of Freys who would ride south beneath the direwolf banner and carry the twin towers proudly at their sides. They spoke as allies speak, each measuring the other, each finding in the other something firmer than he had feared. The king watched the old man's face soften by degrees and understood the mechanism of it precisely. Nothing binds an aggrieved man like being told, in deed and not merely in word, that his grievance has been heard. The betting was called for, and there was laughter, and there was ribaldry, the old crude customs, and Rosalind flushed crimson as her sisters and cousins bore her up the stair. But there was no cruelty in it, only the coarse merriment of a house that felt itself, for once, exalted. And in the chamber above, with the noise of the feast dulled to a murmur through the thick stone, Robb Stark and Rosalind Frey consummated the vow they had made, and the marriage that was law became also flesh, and the last seal was set upon the bond. Afterward he lay awake and reckoned, as he always reckoned, in the dark. He did not love her. He knew this plainly, and did not pretend otherwise even to himself. She was a stranger still, gentle and frightened and kind, and love might come in time, or might not come at all, and either way, it did not signify against the thing he had secured. His honor was whole. He had given his word and then bent his word, and then, instead of breaking it, he had knelt and mended it, and the mending had cost him a measure of pride and won him a crossing, a host reinforced, a wife, a good father, and a war he might yet win. The alliance was sealed now in blood and vow, not shattered by treachery in a hall gone red. He had chosen the harder road at the harder moment, and the road had opened before him rather than closing like a snare. Somewhere below, the music was still playing, and far to the south, in a chamber lit by different candles, a spider's whisperers were already at work, carrying word across the narrow sea and up the King's Road that the young wolf had crossed the Green Fork whole and strong, and that the game upon the board had shifted, and that in King's Landing certain hands would need to move very soon indeed. 4,000 swords. That was the sum of it, the number that Walder Frey had promised long ago in the damp of his own hall, and the number he now delivered, not grudgingly, not with the poison of a bargain half kept, but with the pride of a man who had watched his blood married up into a king's line and found the exchange to his liking. 4,000 men, and with them the crossing, and with the crossing, the whole geography of the war rearranged itself upon the map, like water finding a new channel. Consider the arithmetic of it, because arithmetic is what wars are made of when the songs are stripped away. Robb Stark had crossed the Green Fork with a host bled thin by garrisons and casualties, and the slow attrition of a campaign that had run longer than any northern lord had planned. Now, on the eastern bank, that host swelled. It grew back toward the strength it had known in the first flush of rebellion, and for the first time in months, the young wolf possessed something he had lacked since the Ironborn took the harbors of his homeland. He possessed numbers enough to turn around. To turn around, that was the whole of the thing. A king who marches south may take castles and win battles, but a king whose home lies burning behind him marches with a knife in his back the entire way. Robb had felt that knife since the Raven came bearing word of Winterfell taken, of Theon Greyjoy crowning himself in the yard where they had trained as boys together. He had felt it, and he had endured it, because he had no soldiers to spare for the reclaiming. Now he had soldiers. Now the calculation reversed itself. What if the war in the south could wait? What if the crown of the trident meant nothing without the ground beneath the throne, and that ground was the north that was slipping from his grasp while he chased Lannisters through the riverlands? He gathered his commanders in a tent pitched near the water, and the men who came to it were the men who would decide whether the north could be won back before the Ironborn dug themselves into its bones. Roose Bolton came, soft of voice and pale of eye, a man whose stillness was its own kind of statement, who said little and calculated much, and who understood, as Robb understood, that Moat Cailin was the door, and the door was shut. Brynden Tully came, the Blackfish, gray and hard and reliable as stone, the one man in that tent who cared nothing for advancement and everything for winning. And the Freys came, sons and grandsons of the old man on the Green Fork, their loyalty freshly minted in the wedding hall, eager now to spend it in the field and prove that the crossing had been no mere transaction, but a true joining of houses. The plan took shape as plans do, through the placing of pieces, 2 prongs across the neck. That was the shape of it, because the neck permitted no single great march, no broad advance of banners across open ground. The neck was bog and causeway and drowned road, and Moat Cailin sat athwart the only path like a stopper in a bottle. 3 towers of ancient stone that a small garrison could hold against a vast one. So Robb would not throw his whole strength at the towers. He would divide. He would send a vanguard of Freys and Bolton men north through the marshes, testing the causeway, drawing the Ironborn's attention, while the main body followed in support, and the Crannog men of House Reed served as guides through paths no southern eye could find. Roose Bolton spoke for the vanguard in his quiet way, and Robb noted the eagerness beneath the calm, and filed it away as a thing to remember, because a man who volunteers for the tip of the spear is either brave or ambitious or both, and both is the most dangerous combination a king can employ. The Dreadfort men know the north, Bolton said. They know how the Ironborn fight, and they do not fear the cold. He did not say the rest. He did not need to. That the vanguard, first through the door, would also be first to any glory that lay beyond it. Robb heard the unspoken clause and let it stand, because for now their interests ran together, and a king takes the alignment he is given and worries later about where the lines might diverge. And through all of it, through the councils and the marching orders and the grim arithmetic of causeways and drowned roads, there moved a softer current that Catelyn Stark alone seemed fully to measure. Rosalind Frey walked the camp, gentle, frightened, kind. She had come north a stranger into an army of hard men who had every reason to resent the house she came from, and instead of shrinking, she had reached out, small kindness by small kindness. A word here, a bandage there, a shy smile that asked for nothing and disarmed men who had forgotten how to be disarmed. The northern soldiers, who had muttered about Frey treachery for a year, found they could not mutter about a girl who wept for their wounded and mended their king's cloak with her own hands. She softened them. She softened him, too. And Catelyn watched her son come to the marriage bed, a reluctant husband, and rise from it, morning by morning, something nearer to a contented one. Catelyn understood what she was seeing. Her son's honor, the honor that had bent and not broken, had bought him 4,000 swords and a crossing and a road home. But it had bought him something the maps could not show. It had bought him a steadiness, a thing that held the men together in the quiet hours when fear crept in. And as the vanguard formed its columns at the edge of the marsh, banners of the flayed man and the twin towers rising above the reeds, Roose Bolton turned his pale eyes north toward Moat Cailin and said nothing, and thought a great deal. What if the most dangerous ground in all the north were not a battlefield at all, but a road, a single road, raised above black water, hemmed on both sides by bog that swallowed men and horses without a sound? The Neck did not need armies to defend it. It needed only patience, and the Crannogmen had that in abundance. Robb Stark led his host onto the causeway at dawn, and the marsh closed around them like a held breath. Mist clung to the reeds. The horses picked their steps with unusual care, as though they too understood that a wrong footfall here meant a slow death in the mire. Behind him came the columns, the Frey towers, and the northern wolves, and the pale banners of the Dreadfort, 4,000 new swords, and the remnant of an old army, threading a path no wider than a village lane through a green wilderness that had drowned invaders since the dawn of the first men. And there, waiting at a bend in the road where the water gave way to a low island of firmer earth, stood Howland Reed. He was a small man, smaller than his legend, and Robb might have ridden past him had the lords not gone quiet at his approach. Reed did not bow deeply. He inclined his head the precise amount owed a king who had not yet won his kingdom back, and no more. His eyes were old and calm, and they had seen things the maps did not record. "The road is yours, your grace," Reed said. "My people will guide you. Step where they step. Trust nothing green and nothing that looks like ground." Robb thanked him, and they rode together at the head of the column, and it was in the low voice of the Lord of Greywater Watch that the king first heard the thing that would not leave him afterward. Reed spoke of the far north, not of Moat Cailin, not of the Ironborn, not of the war for the crown. He spoke of the wall and of what pressed against it. He spoke of ravens that came with strange messages, and of men of the Night's Watch found frozen and then found walking. He did not raise his voice. He offered no proof a lord could weigh. He simply set the words down between them, quietly, the way a man sets down a stone he has carried a long way and can no longer bear alone. "There is a war beyond your war, your grace," Reed said. "It does not care who sits the Iron Throne. It is coming south, whether the throne is settled or no." Robb said nothing for a long while. He was a young man with a kingdom to reclaim, and a garrison ahead of him, and a wife's father to keep loyal. And here was an old lord of the marsh telling him that all of it might be a game played on a board that was already burning at the edges. He did not dismiss it. That was the measure of him. He tucked it away, a cold seed planted in the warm soil of his more immediate concerns, and he turned his mind back to the stones rising out of the mist ahead. Moat Cailin. 3 towers still standing, of the 20 that once were, a ruin, and a fortress that no ruin had any right to be. Whoever held those broken towers held the causeway, and the causeway was the only door into the north. Theon Greyjoy's Ironborn held it now. A few hundred men, perhaps, dug in among the black stones, and every one of them worth 10 on that ground, because the attacker had to come at them single file down a road they could rain arrows upon from 3 directions at once. Robb sent his summons first. He was a king. Kings gave men the chance to yield. The Ironborn commander, a hard, salt-bitten man named Dagon Cod, sent it back in the crudest terms the marsh had heard in 100 years. Robb read the reply, and his jaw tightened, but he did not order the assault. This was the moment his lords watched most closely. The old Robb, the grieving, furious Robb, might have thrown men at those towers to be rid of the insult. The Robb who had bent his honor and gained a road did the arithmetic instead. 4,000 new swords, bought at the cost of a marriage he had not wanted. He would not spend them dying in the mud to satisfy a dead man's rebellion. So he turned to the 2 things the Ironborn did not expect. Crannogmen, who could move through the bog as the Ironborn could not, and who could poison a garrison's water and pick off its sentries and let no ship of resupply pass the drowned channels. And Frey engineers, dour men with theodolites and levels, who studied the causeway and the sluggish water and found the old drains the first men had cut, and set to work turning the fortress into an island cut off from every road and every hope. It took 11 days. 11 days of the Ironborn watching their walls hold against no assault at all, which was somehow worse, for a man can die fighting, but a man cannot fight thirst and silence, and the certainty that no Reaver was coming to lift the siege. Dagon Cod held out until his men began to eye him the way starving men eye the strong. Then he asked to parley. They met on the causeway at the edge of arrow range, the king in the north and the Ironborn captain, and Robb offered him the thing he had learned to offer, not annihilation, but a door, safe passage north to the sea for any man who laid down his axe. No ransom, no maiming, boats to the coast and a ship home to the Iron Islands, and their lives, which were more than they had any right to expect. Cod stared at him a long moment, weighing whether the wolf's word was worth the parchment it would be written on. "And if we refuse?" he asked. Robb looked past him at the 3 broken towers and did not answer. He did not need to. Cod laid down his axe. The others followed, because men who have seen a king keep his word to their enemies will gamble that he keeps it to them as well. And Robb had spent the long march north spending nothing but his word, and finding that it purchased more than gold. So the causeway emptied. The Ironborn filed out under guard toward the coast, and the king in the north turned his eyes toward the land that had made him, and rode to see what remained of home. What he found was ash. Winterfell stood, in the way that a skeleton stands. The walls held, gray and ancient and indifferent, but within them, the great hall had collapsed into itself, and the maester's turret was a blackened stump, and the glass gardens where his mother had walked were a field of shattered panes catching the pale sun like 1,000 broken teeth. Robb did not weep. He had learned somewhere on the road between the twins and here that weeping was a thing a man did when he had time, and a king who wishes to remain a king does not have time. He walked the ruin instead. He counted it. He measured the loss the way a lord measures a harvest, cold and precise, because grief that cannot be spent is grief that must be stored, and stored grief keeps a long while. Then a small folk woman, half starved and half mad with fear, told him a thing that changed the arithmetic entirely. She had seen the boys, not dead, fled, 2 crows and a wildling woman, and a simple giant of a stable boy, gone north or gone into the wolf's wood, no one knew, but not hung from the walls, not burned in the hall. Bran and Rickon, alive as far as any tongue could swear. It is a small thing, a rumor from a frightened woman, and it is everything, because a man fighting for a graveyard fights like a man with nothing left, but a man fighting for something still breathing fights differently, and Robb Stark felt the hope enter him, like a blade sliding into a wound it had made before. He did not trust it. He held it anyway. A king takes his hope where he can find it, and hoards it as carefully as his grief. Word of his coming ran ahead of him faster than any horse. The north is vast and empty and slow, but it is not deaf, and the thing it heard was this: the wolf has come home, and he comes with a host. Not a broken remnant limping back to die. A host, Riverlanders and Freys, and the men he had brought south and brought north again, disciplined by 100 small victories. And this changed everything for the lords who had bent their necks to the Ironborn, because there had been no one else to bend them for. Consider the position of a northern lord in that hour. He had knelt to necessity, not to conviction. He had watched the reavers take his coast and his daughters and his grain, because the king in the north was 1,000 leagues away, chasing a war that seemed to have swallowed him whole. And now the king is back, and the king remembers who knelt and who did not, and the arithmetic of survival flips in an instant. To stay bent is to be a traitor when the wolf's justice comes. To rise now, to send men now, is to be a loyal house that endured a hard season. Every lord in the north performed this calculation, and nearly every lord reached the same answer. The Manderleys came first. White Harbor's fat wealth made flesh in columns of men-at-arms marching up the King's Road, because the Sea Lords had lost the most to the Ironborn and had the most to reclaim. The Umbers came down from the last hearth, the Great John's kin roaring for Reaver blood. The Glovers, dispossessed of Deepwood Motte, came with the particular fury of men who have a specific castle to take back and know exactly whose hands hold it. The banners swelled. The direwolf flew again over ranks that thickened with every day of the march, and Robb watched his strength grow and did not let it make him careless, for a growing army is a hungry army, and a hungry army in a burned land is a problem as much as a weapon. So he divided it. This is the moment the strategist inside him overruled the son who wanted only to march to a single ruin and stand there. The Ironborn were not an army. They were a scattering, 100 small raiding parties clinging to 100 stretches of coast, and to defeat them, one had to become a scattering oneself, to hunt them the way one hunts wolves, in packs, across the whole breadth of the land at once. He sent columns west, toward Deepwood and the stony shore. He sent riders to the coast to burn the longships where they lay beached, because a reaver without a ship is not a reaver. He is only a man far from home. And he kept a hard core of his best horse for himself, because the king must be seen to draw blood with his own hand, and because there was a thirst in him now that no parley could slake. He found his battle near the Fever River, where an Ironborn captain named Ralph Kenning had gathered 300 axes and thought himself safe in the broken country. He was not safe. Robb came down on him at dawn through the mist. Cavalry, where the Ironborn expected none, and the fight was short, and it was ugly, and it was, above all, personal. The Reavers broke. Kenning did not run fast enough. And when it was done, Robb stood among the dead with his sword red to the hilt, and Greywind at his side, muzzle deep in the ruin of the enemy. And for the first time since the twins, he felt something that was not quite grief, and not quite hope, but sat between them, cold and clean. Vengeance, in part. A down payment on a debt still owed. Then a rider came up the churned and bloody ground, hard from the south, with a letter in his hand. The letter carried the seal of White Harbor, and it carried news that would change the shape of the war in the north, more surely than any single sword stroke could. Balon Greyjoy was dead, fallen from a bridge in a storm on his island of Pike, his neck broken on the rocks below, and with him had died the singular will that bound the Ironborn to their conquest. Robb read the words twice. He did not shout. He did not smile. He handed the letter to his maester and looked north and west toward the coasts, where the Reavers still held his castles, and in the quiet behind his eyes, the pieces of the board rearranged themselves. A king without an heir agreed upon is a kingdom at war with itself. Balon had left no clear successor, and the Ironborn were not a people who yielded a crown quietly. There would be a king's moot, or there would be a bloodletting, and in either case the men holding Moat Cailin and Deepwood Motte and the scattered strongpoints along the stony shore would soon be looking over their shoulders toward home rather than out at the northern host. Their captains would begin to calculate. Every axe held in the north was an axe not present at the reckoning to come, and every day spent garrisoning a hostile land was a day surrendered to a rival's ambition. Robb understood this before his lords did. He understood that the war he had been fighting with steel could now be fought with patience, and that patience, wielded correctly, was the cheapest weapon a king possessed. So he did not throw his exhausted host against Moat Cailin's walls. He tightened the noose instead. He drove the Ironborn from the coast in pieces, taking the smaller holdfasts one by one, offering the isolated bands a simple arithmetic: die here, in a land that hates you, or lay down your arms and sail home to fight for whatever crown the king's moot raised. Some chose the axe. Most chose the sea, and as the Reavers thinned and withdrew, word came at last from Deepwood Motte, where Asha Greyjoy held her father's men and her father's ambition, that she would treat with the king in the north. She came to the parley with her own calculations laid bare. Robb read them the way he read a battle line. Asha wanted the Seastone chair, and to win it, she needed her ships and her men intact, not squandered holding a conquest her father had never had the strength to keep. Every day she lingered in the north weakened her claim at home. She knew it. Robb knew that she knew it. This made the negotiation almost gentle. In its way, two people arriving at the same conclusion from opposite ends of a table and needing only to agree on the words. He offered her withdrawal without slaughter, free passage for her ships, her men, her plunder such as it was, in exchange for the full evacuation of the north and the surrender of the castles she held. And one thing more, if Theon Greyjoy yet lived, if he had survived the fall of Winterfell and whatever had befallen him after, Robb wanted him delivered into northern hands. He did not say why. He did not need to. Asha's face gave nothing away, and she did not promise Theon was alive, only that if he could be found, he would be given up. It was enough. It was, in truth, more than Robb had expected, and he took it without haggling further, because a king who wins the war he is offered does not gamble to win the war he is not. The Ironborn began to withdraw within the fortnight, sails black against the gray sea. oars beating southward, the long dark shapes of their longships dwindling until the northern coast was empty of them for the first time in a year. Moat Caelan's garrison, cut off and starving, and now without a cause worth dying for, opened its gates rather than face the neck at Robb's back and the fever in its own bellies. The north was reclaimed, not whole, not healed, but reclaimed, castle by castle, shore by shore, a country returned to its people, even as the true winter gathered on the horizon, like a held breath. And here, the harder work began, the work that wins no songs. Robb established a temporary seat, for Winterfell was a burned ruin and could not yet shelter a court, and from that seat, he set about the governance of a land that had bled for 2 years. He appointed loyal lords to the holdings, whose masters had died in the south or fallen defending their gates. He took stock of granaries and salt stores and herds, counting against the winter the way a careful man counts coin against a lean season, because the enemy that killed most in the north had never been the Ironborn at all. It had always been the cold. He knew this. He planned for it. He sent men to the mountain clans and the Wolfswood and the deep interior, with instructions to gather and store and prepare, and he did not sleep as much as a king ought, and his lords remarked on it, and he did not care. There was one thing he did not neglect. In open hall, before the assembled lords of the north, he spoke of the Freys. He named them. He named the 2,000 swords that had ridden north when the war was blackest, the men who had held the line at the Twins and marched into the neck and paid in blood for a marriage that had been, in the beginning, only a bridge and a bargain. He thanked them by name, House Frey, kin now by law and by battle both, and he let his lords see that gratitude was not weakness but strategy, that the man who honors his debts openly is a man other men will lend to again. Walder Frey's grandson stood a little straighter in that hall, and in the south, where the war was far from finished, a letter was already being written that would test how far this new alliance could bend before it broke. What if a war could end not with a battle, but with a letter? What if the wisest move a king could make was to stop moving altogether, to plant his feet in the frozen earth of his own kingdom, and say to the world beyond his borders, "I want nothing more than this." This is the calculation Robb Stark makes as winter tightens its grip on the land, and it is the most dangerous calculation of all, because it requires him to want less than he could take, and to convince his enemies that his restraint is not a trap. The letter travels south in the hands of men chosen for their steadiness rather than their fire. It moves through the neck, past the black waters and the reaching bog, past Moat Caelan, where northern spears now bristle again upon the ancient stones, and it carries with it a proposal so simple in its shape that the men who first read it in King's Landing mistake it, briefly, for a bluff. Recognition of the kingdom of the north and the trident as a realm apart, the return of Sansa Stark to her family, a border fixed forever at the neck, that narrow throat of land where the south becomes the north and the warm becomes the cold. Nothing more. No march on the capital, no claim upon the Iron Throne, no demand for the heads of the men who killed his father. Only the kingdom his father died defending, and his sister home, and an ending. In the small council chamber, Tywin Lannister reads it twice. He does not react the way lesser men would react. He does not sneer at the presumption or rage at the loss of the North. He sets the parchment upon the table, and he considers it the way a merchant considers an offer he had not expected, but had, perhaps, quietly hoped for. Because Tywin Lannister knows arithmetic better than any man alive, and the arithmetic of the North is grim. The North is vast. The North is poor. The North is cold beyond the imagining of southern men. and it defends itself with a weapon no army can defeat, which is distance and winter and the simple murderous logic of supply lines that stretch 1,000 leagues through country that hates you. To conquer the north in winter is to feed an army into a white and endless mouth. He has done the sums. Everyone at the table has done the sums, though not all of them will say so. And there is the reach to think of. There is the great alliance with House Tyrell, purchased with a royal marriage and held together by the fragile mortar of shared victory. And there is the reconstruction of a city half burned by wildfire. And there are the empty granaries and the emptier treasury, and the debt owed to the Iron Bank of Bravos that grows heavier with every moon. The realm the Lannisters have won is a realm exhausted. To hold it, they must not fight a second war in the frozen dark, while the first war's ashes are still warm. Some at the table argue against it. Pride argues against it. The Iron Throne does not surrender kingdoms, they say. The Starks are traitors, and traitors are not negotiated with. They are broken. Let the North freeze, let it starve, and when spring comes we shall take it whole. Tywin listens to this and says nothing for a long moment. Then he speaks, and when he speaks of ledgers. What is the cost, he asks, of a war fought in a country we do not want, in a season we cannot survive, against a foe who asks only to be left alone? And what is the cost of peace? The North buys nothing from the South now, but a friendly North buys grain, buys timber, buys the goodwill that keeps a border quiet. A hostile North, penned and starving, will one day come south with a grievance and a grandson who remembers. He lets the words settle. He does not raise his voice. He never raises his voice. He simply lays the two futures side by side and lets the men around him see which one weighs more. The boy is cleverer than his father, Tywin thinks, and does not say. Ned Stark would have died before bending his knee to anything. The son has found the third road, the one between kneeling and dying. He has offered a peace that costs the Lannisters only a kingdom they cannot keep, and a girl they no longer need. And he has framed it not as a demand but as an accommodation between practical men, and that framing is itself a kind of mastery. There is no insult in it to seize upon. There is no threat to answer with steel. There is only a proposition, and propositions, unlike armies, can be considered. Sansa Stark becomes the pivot upon which everything turns. She is a hostage of diminishing value, betrothed to no one who matters now, a Stark in a nest of lions who has served her purpose and outlived it. To keep her is to keep a grievance in the heart of the North that will fester for a generation. To return her is to spend nothing and buy something rare. Tywin understands hostages. A hostage is only worth the fear she inspires, and the fear of the North has already been spent, poorly, in the North's blood at the Green Fork and the Whispering Wood. And so the debate turns, slowly, the way a great ship turns, groaning against its own weight. Not toward affection, for there is none. Not toward honor, for these are not men who trade in it. Toward interest, toward the cold and perfect logic of two thrones that have decided, each for its own reasons, that they cost less standing apart than pressed together in endless war. The reply is drafted. It is careful, and it is conditional, and it does not yet say yes, but it does not say no. And in the North, Robb Stark waits by a fire that will not warm him, watching the road south, knowing that somewhere on it, a rider is already coming with an answer that will shape the rest of his life. The rider comes, and with him comes not a battle, but a table. Consider the peculiar arithmetic of ending a war, how much slower it moves than the making of one. War is a matter of a single word spoken in anger. Peace is 1,000 words weighed, discarded, revised, each one measured against the pride it might wound. and the advantage it might surrender. The terms arrive in stages, the way frost arrives, first a whisper along the edges of things, and then a hard and total presence. And in the halls where these terms are read aloud, no one raises a cup, no one embraces. There is only the sound of parchment turning and the long silences of men calculating what they have won against what they have been forced to give. What is a crown worth when it is not taken but conceded? This is the question that hangs over the accord. For the peace that is struck does not restore the old order, it ratifies a new one. Robb Stark is named king in the north and of the Trident, and the naming is not a courtesy but a wall, a border drawn in ink that will harden into stone. The south keeps its throne, the north keeps its king. Between them lies the Trident, and along that river, at the crossing that has always been the throat of the kingdom, sit the Freys. Old Walder Frey, who wagered on a boy and won, is granted new honors, new lands, the standing of a keystone lord, whose loyalty now anchors the southern edge of an alliance that no longer needs to prove itself in blood. The twins, which was always a toll bridge, becomes a gate, and the man who holds the gate holds a value he never held before. Study the shape of what a single kept promise has built. Robb Stark had marched south to avenge a father and free a sister, and he had bound himself to a marriage he did not want to secure a crossing he could not do without. He might have broken that bond. Another man would have. Another version of this same king, in another telling, does break it, and the breaking undoes everything, and the river runs red at a wedding that was meant to mend a slight. But this Robb kept faith. He kept it when it was inconvenient, when a prettier match beckoned, when the old man's demands were petty and his manner insulting. He kept it because he had learned, from a father who lost his head for the keeping of it, that honor is not a luxury a king can afford to spend, and the keeping of it has purchased not merely victory, it has purchased survival. His army was never cut down at a feast. His bannermen were never scattered. His mother was never made to watch her son die before her. The north did not shatter. And now, at the table, the fruit of that faith is a border and a crown, and the return of something that grief had long since counted lost. For among the terms, small against the great matters of thrones and rivers, but vast in the only measure that has ever moved the Stark heart, is a name, Sansa. She is to be released north, restored to her family as part of the accord, no longer a hostage, but a daughter going home. The clause is a single line among many. It costs the South nothing it valued, and gives the North everything it grieved for. And when the rider carrying the final terms reaches River Run, and the line is read aloud, Catelyn Stark does not speak. She had asked the gods for the return of her children, when she had all but stopped believing the gods were listening. 2 are dead, she thinks, and she is wrong, though she does not yet know she is wrong. For word of 2 small boys, and a miller's sons, and a burned keep, has not reached her clean. But this one, this daughter, is real, is coming, is on a road moving north with an escort and a promise behind her. The reunion, when it comes, is not the stuff of songs. It is quieter than that. A girl who left a child and returns something harder, thinner, older about the eyes. A girl who has learned in a viper's court to smile when she is afraid, and to keep her face, a still pond over deep and freezing water. She dismounts in a yard she half remembers and half does not, and for a moment, mother and daughter only look at one another, each measuring the distance the other has traveled, each grieving quietly for the version of the other that will not return. And then the distance collapses. Catelyn holds her, and Robb comes down from wherever a king stands to be a brother again, and the 3 of them are a family, or the surviving portion of one, knit back together at a seam that had seemed torn beyond mending. There are tears, and they are not weakness, and no one in that yard would name them so. Robb watches his sister sleep that night, or watches the door behind which she sleeps, and he does the arithmetic once more, the way a man cannot help returning to a sum that has finally, improbably, balanced. A promise kept, that is all it was. A single promise, made grudgingly, honored stubbornly, and from it a crown preserved, a kingdom intact, a mother spared the deepest cut, a sister carried home. He allows himself to believe, for the length of one breath, that the hard part is behind him. It is not. He knows it is not, even as he thinks it. There is a coldness in the air that is not the ordinary cold of a river country in autumn. There are ravens that fly from the wall with words in them that no king wishes to read. Winter is coming, and it is no longer a house's motto, but a fact settling over the world like a hand closing. And somewhere beyond the wall, in the dark past the edge of every map, something older than thrones is stirring, and it does not care who sits upon them. What if the marriage that began as an obligation, a debt paid to an aggrieved and proud old lord, became in the quiet aftermath of war the thing a king had never thought to hope for? Consider the arithmetic of it once more, because arithmetic is how Robb Stark has learned to survive. A bride, chosen from a line of daughters he had never met. A woman he had accepted the way a man accepts a bandage over a wound, useful and necessary and impersonal. And yet there is a way that Rosalind moves through the halls of Winterfell now, softly, without demand, that has begun to work upon him in ways no strategy could have predicted. She does not fill silences with chatter. She does not press him for favor or advancement for her many brothers. She learns the names of the servants, the ages of their children, the particular sorrows carried by a keep still half in ruin. And in the evenings, when the day's disputes have been heard, and the ravens read, and the maps rolled away, she is simply there, a small, steady presence at the edge of the firelight, and Robb finds that he looks for her before he knows he is looking. Affection, when it comes, does not arrive as thunder. It arrives as habit, as the discovery that a chamber feels wrong when she is not in it, as the particular ease of speaking a fear aloud and finding it received without flinching. What if the strongest bonds are not forged in passion, but in the slow accumulation of small reliabilities? Robb does not name what he feels for some time. He simply notices its absence when she is gone, and its warmth when she returns. And one night he understands, with the clean certainty of a man reading a truth he cannot unread, that he loves her. Then comes the morning she tells him she is with child. She says it plainly, standing near the window with the pale light behind her, and for a moment, the king in the north does not move at all. He is doing the arithmetic again. An heir, a child in whom Stark blood and Frey blood will run together, inseparable, a living treaty that no lord can renounce and no crossing can undo. The alliance that saved his crown will now be sealed in flesh, carried forward into a generation that will know nothing of the grudge that shadowed its beginning. Walder Frey, whatever else the old man is, will have a grandchild seated one day upon the seat of kings. That thought binds the two houses more surely than any oath spoken over salt and bread. But Robb is not thinking of Walder Frey when he crosses the room. He is thinking of the child and of her, and when he takes her hands, the calculation dissolves entirely into something warmer and more dangerous, because to love is to have more to lose, and a king can afford little that he cannot afford to lose. Winterfell rises around them as the months turn. Stone by stone, the walls are mended, the burned timbers replaced, the broken towers raised again toward a gray and lowering sky. Robb rebuilds not merely a castle, but the idea of one, the fixed point around which the North orients itself. And as word spreads that the old seat lives again, the bannermen come. They come from the mountain clans and the Wolfswood, from the Barrowlands and the Stony Shore, lords who scattered in the chaos of war, returning now to kneel before a king who kept his crown and his word both. Disputes come with them, as disputes always do, over stolen cattle and disputed boundaries and old blood feuds reopened by the war's disorder. Robb hears them all. He hears them with a patience that surprises the men who bring them, weighing each claim, ruling with a fairness that neither flatters the powerful nor punishes the weak. And slowly, in the manner of such things, a reputation hardens into loyalty. They had followed him to war because he was Ned Stark's son. They follow him now because he has shown them what manner of king he intends to be. Steady, just, unbought. There is no substitute for this, no shortcut to it. And Robb earns it the only way it can be earned, one settled grievance at a time. But the ravens keep coming from the wall. At first, he reads them and sets them aside. For a king, rebuilding a realm has closer fires to tend. Wildlings, gathering in numbers not seen in generations. Ranging parties that ride out and do not return. Reports written in the careful hand of the Lord Commander's maester, and beneath the careful words a note that no ink can quite conceal. Fear. What if the men who have spent their lives watching the edge of the world have begun to see something moving at that edge that they have no words for? Robb remembers Howland Reed. He remembers the Crannogman's quiet warnings, delivered in that soft voice that seemed to carry the weight of things half forgotten and better left forgotten, of a cold that was not the ordinary cold, of a war that made the War of Kings look like a squabble of children. He had listened then out of respect. He listens now out of dread. So he does a thing that no southern king would think to do, a thing that the lords of the Reach and the Westerlands would name folly if they heard of it. He sends grain north. He sends men, seasoned men, volunteers, and the odd criminal spared the noose, on condition of black service. He sends timber and iron and coin to a brotherhood the realm long ago forgot. He turns his gaze from the Game of Thrones toward the thing that does not care who wins it. His lords do not all understand. One asks him plainly, in the great hall, why the king bleeds the North's stores for a few hundred crows on a frozen wall when there are mouths at home to feed. Robb looks at him for a long moment before he answers. Because, he says quietly, the wall between us and the winter is thinner than you think. He does not explain further. He turns instead to the maester and asks how many more men can be spared before spring. The child comes in the deep of a winter's night, when the fires burn low in the hearth of the twins, and the river runs black beneath the bridge. Rosalind labors through the dark hours with the quiet stubbornness that her mother's people never credited to a Frey. And when the dawn breaks pale and cold over the crossing, there is a son. He is small, and he is loud, and he is alive. Robb holds him in the gray light and thinks not of alliances, not of banners, not of the endless arithmetic of thrones. He thinks only that the boy has his mother's mouth and something of Ned Stark about the brow. He names him in the old way, the northern way, a plain hard name that will weather cold and grief and time. And in that naming, something ancient and something new are bound together. The blood of the wolf and the blood of the river, joined not by slaughter, but by a vow a young king chose to keep when it would have been easier to break it. Consider the man who sits watching from the corner of that chamber. Walder Frey is ancient beyond reckoning, a spider grown fat and bitter in his web of stone. He has schemed his whole long life for one thing: to see his blood raised above the station of his birth, to see the Freys count for something in the great house's reckoning. And now he watches a Frey grandson cradled by a king, a boy who will one day wear a crown that no southern lord can touch. It is enough. In the years that follow, Walder Frey does a thing he has never done before. He softens. Not much, not so anyone would call it kindness, but the old poison drains slowly from him, replaced by a satisfaction so complete it becomes almost peace. When he dies, years on, in his own bed, with his own children about him, he dies the most honored old lord in 2 realms, courted by kings, secure in a legacy that will outlast every insult he ever swallowed. His house's future is written now in the line of northern kings. That was the whole of his ambition, and he achieved it not through betrayal, but by being, for once in his long treacherous life, faithful to a bargain struck. The scattered pack begins to gather. Word comes north, uncertain at first, then surer with each passing moon, that the boys did not die at Winterfell, that the smoking ruin held no small bones but the bones of a miller's sons, dressed in stolen clothes by a treacherous ward who wanted the world to believe a lie. Bran lives. Rickon lives. They are found in the wild places where they hid, thin and weathered and older than their years, and they are brought home along roads made safe by a king who won his safety through patience. Sansa comes north too, freed at last from the gilded cage of King's Landing, when the war's ending unclenched the Lannister fist. Arya returns from her long wandering, harder than a girl her age should be, but returned all the same. Under the rebuilt walls of Winterfell they come together, one by one, and the wounds that war and grief carved into each of them do not vanish, for such wounds never do, but they begin, slowly, to heal. There is a particular quiet in the great hall of Winterfell on the first night they are all beneath its roof again. A quiet not of sorrow but of something like completion, as though a broken thing has been made nearly whole. Now weigh what this north has become. A king reigns in the north who did not carve his crown from a mountain of the slain. He kept a single promise. That is the whole of the difference. One vow honored, wherein another telling it was broken. One night at a wedding where no swords were drawn, and no salt betrayal stained the guest bread. From that one choice, everything unspooled differently. The Riverlands stayed loyal, because the Crossing stayed loyal. The War of the Five Kings resolved not into a Stark massacre, but into a Stark independence, grudgingly acknowledged, because the North could not be reconquered by an exhausted realm that had bled itself pale in the South. The Iron Throne, hollowed by its own intrigues, lacked the strength to press a claim across 1,000 frozen leagues. And so the North stands free and united, and, most crucially of all, warned. For Robb Stark learned the lesson that his father tried to teach him, and learned it in time. He turned his gaze from the Game of Thrones toward the enemy that does not care who sits upon them. The grain went north to the wall. The men went north to the wall. The dread that woke in him during that long conversation with the old man in black became the quiet organizing principle of his reign. He does not tell his lords everything he fears, because they would not believe it, and belief unearned is worse than useless. But he prepares. Ravens fly. Watchtowers rise along the northern roads. Granaries fill against a winter that will be longer and colder than any in living memory. The wall between the living and the long night is thinner than his lords think. He knows it. He builds against it, and whether it will be enough, is a question that no king can answer, only prepare for. Winter comes at last, in full and settled earnest, blanketing a kingdom that is secure, where in another world it would have been shattered and bleeding and blind. Snow gathers on the rebuilt battlements of Winterfell, on the roofs of Riverrun, on the great bridge of the Twins where a Frey grandson learns to walk. In the yards of Winterfell, the Stark children move through the falling snow, together, alive, and the young wolf watches them from a high window and thinks that his father would have understood this, if nothing else. Not the crown, the keeping. And so the North endures beneath the deepening white, quiet and whole and ready, and the long night ahead finds it not divided but standing, waiting, unafraid, held together by nothing more and nothing less than one promise a young king chose to keep. And this brings us to the end of this alternate history. If you enjoyed exploring how events might have unfolded differently, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. We dive into new stories from the world of Westeros every single day, imagining the choices, battles, alliances, and destinies that could have completely changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. And if you'd like to explore even more stories, our Lorekeeper members unlock a brand new exclusive alternate history every single week. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think would have happened next? Did this version of history end better than the original? Or would you have taken the story in a completely different direction? Leave your ideas in the comments, because many of the best future stories come directly from your suggestions. Thank you so much for watching and for spending your time with me. I'll see you tomorrow with another alternate history from Westeros. Until then, peace out.